Hello everyone, this is Sarah Tatum. I got a lot of requests about how I did the composite, and I realized that I spend so much time typing out about layering masks, etc., that it would actually be faster for me to just go ahead and do a tutorial. Then anytime anyone asks about compositing, I can say, hey, go watch this. So that's what we're going to do. I've opened up the 3 images that I used, even though in the picture on Facebook I only used 2 images. I really did actually use 3. And I'm just going to walk through exactly what I did. I'm just going to re-edit the picture, so it's going to be a little slow going. But bear with me and you might learn something. Also, if anyone has any suggestions on a more efficient way to do it, I'm all for it. So if you want to comment on the tutorial and let me know how I could do it differently, by all means. So the big thing with compositing is you've got to have the images, usable images to begin with. So I shot these images one right after the other, so I knew the lighting would be the same because I wasn't using any light modifiers, and I wanted them to be very similar in lighting, so I didn't have to mess with that in Photoshop. So you can see the water in the picture of Jordan, and that's exactly the water that I shot with the empty inner tube. So they're right next to each other, and I tried to make sure it was as similar of an angle as I could. It's not perfect, but it's a very similar angle, so the cutting was easy. I retouched slightly in Lightroom, upped the exposure a little bit. That's really it, because I knew I was going into Photoshop. The big thing about compositing is I could not do it without my tablet. I love my tablet. It's fantastic, it's awesome, and wow, would it be slow if I didn't have it. So we're going to start with Jordan, the picture of Jordan, and we're going to cut her out. And I shot the empty inner tube so that the cutting could be really smooth and easier if I already had the inner tube, the blank inner tube. So I can basically just put her in rather than having to cut around the inner tube too. So anyway, you can shoot in camera to make your compositing as easy as possible. Go ahead. There's a million ways you can cut out. You could just use the lasso tool and draw around if you wanted to. And if you hold down the shift key, then you can add to your selection. So if you wanted to do that, it doesn't really matter as far as the cut. Command D or Control D on a PC will deselect. Just as long as you have everything. You need the inner tube and you need Jordan. Other than that, it doesn't matter. You can get as much of the wood as you want. It's just stuff you're going to have to edit out later. The big thing is you need to make sure that you have all of it, because you can't add that back in once the image is pasted without it being a real pain. So got my selection. I'm going to drag it over onto the picture with the blank inner tube. The biggest thing that people seem to not understand about composites is it does take a long time, and a lot of people who say, I don't know how to do it, it doesn't make any sense to me, I can't get them, a lot of times it's because they just aren't taking the time that they need to take into doing it properly. It really is something that takes a great deal of time. If you have to cut, like I've got to cut around this flower, and that's going to take a second, and to get a really clean edge, I've got to really zoom in. I can't just use a wide flat, a wide soft brush and expect that to work. So I can see that the inner tubes are not lining up. So I'm going to try to line up those inner tubes as much as possible. And Command T or Control T will access the transform tool. And if you hold down Shift, then you can scale without distorting the image or layer. So we'll do that. It's a little funky looking at it. And it's not going to be perfect. I had to do a little bit of liquifying to get it just right. I don't think I rotated in the original, so I'm not sure that I want to do that this time for the tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity back up because I don't need to necessarily see only half of it. And create a layer mask. If you come down here, right here at the bottom of your layers panel, you see this little box with a white circle. That creates a layer mask. There you go. And if you hold, I'm going to undo that. If you hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, Alt on a PC, and you click it, it will make an opposite layer mask. So if I were to brush on with white, it would come back in. But I don't want to do that. I want to take away, not add to, so we'll go that way. I'm going to make sure my brush is at 100% because I don't want to leave any of this wood here. And you need to make sure that the way a layer mask works is it's non-destructive, which is really helpful. So you can paint on white or paint on black with a regular brush. And if you paint on black, it's going to take away from your layer. It's going to make it not visible. If you paint on white, it's going to bring it back. And if you press X, you can look over here at my tools palette. If you press X, it bounces back and forth which color is the primary color. So I'm all about using shortcut keys when I can, so you'll hear me click a lot on my keyboard. I'm going to make sure I have a really hard brush, actually. Usually, with head swapping, I do head swapping the same way, but I usually use a soft brush and just try to cut in nice and smoothly across the skin. But for this, I'm going to use a really hard brush because I'm going to have to come in pretty exactly on her face. And so you'll see I have blown it up so much that we're down to the individual pixels. And if I could, I would zoom in even tighter because I'm having a little trouble distinguishing the wood from her skin, and that's making it difficult for me to cut in cleanly. But I know that I can go back, if I don't cut it in tight enough, or if I zoom out and it looks wonky, because I'm doing a layer mask and I'm not erasing. Please don't ever erase when you're doing this. Because I'm doing a layer mask, I can just go back in and fix whatever I need to fix without that being an issue. So I am really, really super tight on here, and if I was using a mouse, this would be so much more difficult. But because I'm using a pen tablet, it makes it nice and easy, especially when I go out here to these bigger areas, because I can just paint, 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 and get that all figured out. And I knew that to make it as realistic as possible, because I did as much as I could in camera to make it a nice, clean edit. So I didn't want to screw it up by being lazy in the post-processing. I really got in here, and this is where I really wanted to zoom in farther, but there was nothing else for it. If I were to zoom in, it would just be bigger pixels, bigger pixels. So just come in here and really get around. This is what sells it. It's when you can get in between those flower petals, and this is a little shabby rosette, if you know what those are. That just means that there's like individual threads sticking out practically. So this is an absolute nightmare when it comes to compositing, but being able to see those individual little threads is going to be what sells the composite, because no one's going to look at those and think that you cut it out, because it's just so exact. And I certainly do not have to go in pixel for pixel with a face swap. In fact, I don't want to do that because your skin is so uneven that doing pixel for pixel is really not going to help you. You need kind of a smooth transition from face to face. And what I found to be the case when it comes to face swaps is the face needs to be facing the same direction. If you've got to have the face to swap it with. You can't just pull any face from anything and swap it with another. Maybe someone who is a much better Photoshop master than I am could, but I'm all about efficiency because this is a business. This is not a hobby and I have 2 babies. I don't have time to sit in front of a computer for hours and hours and hours. You've got to have the face to swap it with, and then it's just a matter of selecting around the face and layering and layer masking off so that it looks the best that it can. And there's no right or wrong way to do that. Sometimes I'm just swapping the eyes. Sometimes when I only need to swap the eyes, I'll still leave the cheek and the nose because that's what looks more natural for the swap. So as much as these tutorials can be helpful, to some degree you've got to be a little intuitive about the way in which you go about editing. A lot of using Photoshop this is what I always tell my students that I tutor. A lot of using Photoshop is understanding how the tools work and then using them in a way that works best for you. There are a million ways to do everything in Photoshop. That's just a fact. And I know that there are different ways to do what I'm doing now, and there may be better ways to do what I'm doing now, and that's great, and I'd love to learn those. So if you're one of those people that, you know, and forgive me, I'm not going to try to offend anyone here, but if you're one of those people that just uses actions and you don't know what they do, you're going to get in trouble when those actions don't do what you want. If you're using actions and you know what they're doing and why, actions are great. I use actions, I write actions, I use actions that I have acquired. I love Totally Rad's actions, but I understand what the action is doing. And if I don't, then I try and figure it out. Because if it does something I don't want it to do, that doesn't mean the effect is useless. It just means it might need to be tweaked, and if I don't know how to tweak it, because I don't know what it's doing, it does become useless. So just, if you're going to use Photoshop and you're going to pretend to be proficient at Photoshop, actually be proficient at Photoshop. Once I get down to the actual inner tube, I can be a little easier about it, but because I'm going to end up soft brushing away from there anyway. Because as you can see, the colors do not line up on the inner tube either. And once I've cut around the head, I can open that brush back up. And if you keep it a hard brush, see, if this were a soft brush, I'd be brushing off of the scalp even more. But if I keep it a hard brush, then I can be a lot faster about getting rid of all this stuff, all this excess. I'm back up. Now, as I pulled back, I'm going to look at this and see what looks unnatural. Look at how you can see the individual threads on that flower. That's going to help sell it. Down here, it's looking a little sketchy, right here on the back of her head. So I'm going to come in and see if I can't figure out why that is and clean that up a little bit. I can see a little bit. It's a little dirty. All right, now let's get this inner tube. I'm going to switch to a soft brush. I'm going to turn my hardness all the way down, because I want this to blend. And obviously I'm painting the wrong color. I want this to blend in. So around the edges I go on with a soft brush to pull some of it. This way I don't have to cut around her entire body to get it right. I can be kind of smooth about it. And I just watch the inner tube and look for where it just kind of looks like it's more consistent. I'm going to paint her back in a little bit, and I'll show you why here. If you look right here, there's a shadow here. That's why the colors didn't line up, because that's the shadow of her head on the inner tube. Shadows are another thing that sells a composite. So instead of getting rid of the top inner tube to leave the red underneath, I'm going to add that shadow back in there, because that's important. However, I'm also looking at the curve of the inner tube, and there would not be a shadow right here, because this is where the inner tube starts to curve out, so the sun would have hit that instead of the shadow, so I'm going to have to get rid of the inner tube there. So it's all about just, I'm going to turn down my opacity to just help blend it just a little bit more. There we go. Now we're cooking with gas. And yes, now the inner tube looks a little funkily shaped, and we'll fix that with the liquify tool later. The inner tube looks a little funky, we'll fix that, but the cut's pretty good. What I want to do now, because she was laying on wood, and the wood was not blue by any stretch of the imagination, in a real life scenario, she would have a little bit of that blue reflecting in her head, so I'm actually going to take a really light brush, maybe between 5 and 10. 7 I think is actually what it ended up being earlier too. And I'm just going to brush around the edge of her head just to bring in that blue a little bit, just to kind of help kind of tie it all together. Another way, if the color is looking off, if you put a photo filter over it, sometimes that kind of helps blend the two images together, because they have this similar color overlaid on top of it, as long as it doesn't end up looking completely off. So I've just brought in just the tiniest little bit. I don't even know if you can really tell. We'll see here. I'll pull up my history tool brush, or my history palette. Yeah, you can see, if if I go back and forth here, how it just kind of brings in some cool tones to the top of her head, and that's just going to kind of help her blend into this a little bit. So, we got our cut. Cut looks pretty good. The inner tube looks nasty, 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 so we're going to clean that up. And I know this is a tutorial about compositing, but I want it to be a tutorial about cleaning up an image in its entirety. So, healing brush tool is what I'm going to use for the inner tube. I will use the clone stamp if need be, but I think the healing brush is probably going to do what I need it to do for this. You just kind of have to gauge the situation as to which tool you end up using. I like the healing brush because it kind of takes half of what you're replacing it with and half of what's already there and kind of blends them together, so it just ends up looking more natural. And all I'm doing now, you hold down Alt to select your sample area. So hold down the Alt key, click here, release the Alt key, and it's going to replace. But there's nothing to replace it with because that's the lower inner tube. So hold down the Alt key, click, and replace. That's how it works. Thanks to my tablet, yet again, I'm telling you, get a tablet if you need to edit anything ever. You're going to take forever. You won't know what you did before you had a tablet once you get a tablet. But I just hold down this little Alt key and just go to town on these spots. And I'm constantly resampling because, you know, I want it to be from, I don't want to sample this color over here to put over here. It's not going to make any sense. You know, oh, there we go. There's the healing brush messing up. It's trying to take the general area, which includes blue. This would be a situation where I would either need to zoom in and be tighter so it doesn't try to sample that blue, or I would use the clone stamp, and zooming in worked here. But that's where the healing brush can screw people up. If people are confused about why the healing brush doesn't appear to be working, that's usually what's happening. They're too close to an edge with contrasting colors or contrasting shadows or whatever, and it's doing something funky. When you ever try to edit hair, a lot of times the healing brush will screw up a lot because it starts to blend the skin tone in with the hair. So healing brush tool is getting rid of all the major stuff. What I'm going to do later is go in with a retouching action, basically the same thing that would soften skin. And this is a situation, a prime example of just using the tools that you have and modifying them to create the look that you want. I know kind of what a skin smoothing action does. It just takes the general area and kind of blends it all and softens it up. Well, that kind of looks like what needs to happen. What I'm going to do now, I am going to hit Shift, Command, Alt, E. So that's Control, Shift, Alt on a PC, Shift, Option, Command on a Mac. And what that's going to do is create a new layer at the top, combining all the layers below. So that way you have all the layers below you, but you also have this top. The next thing that I did for mine, I thought that she was just too big in the picture, and I didn't like that. I just wanted her to be smaller. I mean, it's fine as is, but I kind of wanted her to be smaller. So I have this, it's looking good. I'm just going to go ahead and drag it over. No, that's not what I did. I dragged the water over so that I could keep all my layers together. Drag the picture of just the water over. Line it up. Boop. There we go. Put it underneath this layer. And now I'm going to create a layer mask. And I'm going to do a reverse layer mask. This is actually not how I did it originally, but I'm going to do that this time. And I'm going to get a brush, paint with white at 100% opacity, and she should just appear right back in here. Yeah. There she is. Isn't she adorable? Now you're sitting here going, what? That was completely pointless. Why in the round world did you go through all that? I want her to be smaller in the frame. So I'm going to hit Command T. And I'm going to drop her down a little bit. And now I've got more water surrounding her. And she can be smaller in the frame without screwing it up really bad. Yeah, now the ripples are the wrong size, and yes, that annoys me greatly. So I'm going to paint a little more water to give myself a lot of room to work with. Just make sure I don't have a hard edge. And then I'm going to turn the opacity down on my brush a lot and just come back in underneath here and paint some more over this water, because it is essentially the same water. I mean, it's the same pool, it's almost the exact same spot. So if I just come in here with a lower opacity brush, that texture underneath should blend with the texture on top, and it should still be pretty good. It should look pretty natural. The big thing I want to watch out for, the shadow from the inner tube over here. I do not want to get rid of that. So I have to make sure that I'm not brushing away that shadow. There you go, she's nice and small in the frame now. Make sure my hard edge isn't there, and sometimes I'll check. Looking here, see, I can see that my hard edge is showing. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up to 100 and just make sure that that edge is gone. Because that is something that will screw you up when you go to print. Now I've opened up the liquify tool because the inner tube is a little bit of a funky shape. The thing with the liquify tool is subtlety, 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 subtlety. If you're trying to make someone skinny, you can only make them so much skinnier before it looks unnatural. So I'm going to just barely move this inner tube at all. It's going to make a huge difference, but I have to make sure that it still looks natural. I like to sharpen images when I go to finish them. So these are some of my totally rad actions that I use. I use Selecto Sharp, and basically it just Selecto Sharp, totally rad action, runs unsharp mask twice and creates a layer mask so that I can brush it on where I want it. And I usually do 50% because 100% would create way too much grain. But it does a nice pop on whatever I want to pop. So I usually do the face. If she's got a cute little outfit on that I want to pop, then I'll Selecto Sharp the outfit, the hair bow, but I just don't want to do too much. And now to fix the inner tube, like I said I was going to, Pro Retouch is totally rad's skin softening action, and I kind of want to run skin softening on her anyway, at least a little bit. I'm going to go in here, and again at 50%, I just don't like 100% on anything. Because she was out in the sun and she was in this little outfit, she's a little splotchy, not too much, so I'm just going to brush her real quick so that she's nice and smooth and cute. And then if I go over the inner tube, I can see those colors just start to blend together. I don't want to go too much over these ripples because that's going to give it away that that's what I was doing, so I'll leave those alone for the most part and just get the parts of the inner tube that are nice and plasticky and smooth to begin with. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to look a lot better and it will look more natural. So I will accept some imperfections for it to look more natural. And I want to flatten that as well, and I'm going to use Shift Command E, and that will merge all the visible layers. And I turned off all the other layers underneath just in case. So I didn't need that anymore, and I knew that it was exactly what I wanted, so I went ahead and flattened it. I'm okay with that. The last thing that I'm going to do that you saw, I changed the color of the inner tube to orange, and a key point here that I want to make, and I'm going to go ahead and flatten this because I know I don't need to change anything about it. I'm going to create a new layer for starters, just a layer of the layer below it, so that if I have to go back and take something off, I can really easily. But the main thing I wanted to do is I don't want to change it to a color that's way on the other end of the spectrum because it's not going to look natural because her skin has that red reflecting on her. It's just easier. Just keep your life as simple as possible and try to make your changes as subtle as possible. So I made it orange. Also, orange and blue are complementary colors. This is the Replace Color tool. You can find that by going to Image, Adjustments, replace color. I wrote a shortcut key because I use it all the time. It's Command H. That may even be the default, I'm not sure. So Command H, and you select whatever color within the image that you want to change. I selected inside this red part. I found out from earlier if I select out here, it's not going to select enough. It's not going to change it appropriately, so I had to pick this darker part of the inner tube. Adjust the fuzziness so that it's really changing everything. Pull my hue, and there it's going orange. And then I just adjust the saturation, the lightness, whatever, to make it what I want. And I'll make sure I'm adjusting the fuzziness appropriately, however much it needs to be. And sometimes I'll reselect. If it looks like it's not doing what I want it to do, I'll reselect another area. I kind of like that a little better. And you can hear it's showing you what's selected. All the white part is what is selected and how much of it is selected. So the darker gray it is, the less it's adjusting. I kind of like the inner tube better here, but it's going to have some pretty harsh red lines where it's not really selecting very well here. So I'm going to go back to there. And if you look, it is selecting some of her outfit and some of her skin. And I will have to go in and take that off later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And again, click my layer mask down here, the little white circle. Brush with black at 100% on her skin. And I can't really tell too much. I know it's there, so I'm going to get it. I'm going to hit everything, but I need it to come off of her outfit, off of her skin, and her outfit's coming back a little bit. And there you go. And then I would save it as a PSD file because I want to keep all the layers intact, and then I'd save the JPEG also. Save it for Facebook, and good to roll. That is everything. If you have any suggestions, please feel free. If you have any questions, drop me a line if I can explain anything further. I hope this has been helpful in some way to show you something you may not have seen before. And I hope that you have a wonderful day.